Did really well on the show, and everyone's glad I did it, but I got in trouble. Sitting at work reading magazines, the receptionist goes, David, Eddie Murphy's on line 1 for you.
Uh-oh.
For 25 years, David Spade has stayed quiet about one of the most uncomfortable moments of his career. A harmless, yet unfortunate joke that turned his hero into his worst enemy. This wasn't just a fumble. It was one of the most infamous moments to have ever been aired on Saturday Night Live, one that is talked about to this day. Now, for the first time, the comedian is finally spilling the beans and telling the full truth about what has gone down between him and Eddie Murphy, how the actor reacted, and why it has continued to haunt him for decades. Chapter 1: The Punchline That Changed Everything. To understand the full picture of this controversy, we have to go back to 1995 when David Spade was still new to Saturday Night Live. He was young, ambitious, and grateful to have this major opportunity that was bound to help him move forward in his career. But of course, being on a show like SNL demands major risks. Like many new cast members, Spade, too, had to take shots at celebrities during the weekend update section, where no one is ever off-limits. Now the comedian was just doing his job, but he had no idea of the storm that was coming. While covering the box office failure of Vampire in Brooklyn, Spade flashed a black and white photo of Eddie Murphy and said, "Look, children, it's a falling star. Make a wish."
Look, children, it's a falling star. Make a wish.
The joke was brutal, but hilarious nonetheless. But while the audience laughed, things weren't looking so funny behind the scenes. On a recent episode of Fly on the Wall with Dana Carvey, Spade admitted that the moment cost him more than people realized at the time. The comedian confessed that he was a huge fan of Murphy's, and he had hoped that the actor would take the joke in stride. However, things took a turn when he realized that Murphy actually hated the fact that he had taken a shot at him.
And I made fun of him, and it didn't go well. And he called me, and we had it out. Actually, he had it. I didn't fight back, really.
And as a result, Spade had to spend 25 years seeking forgiveness from the legend. So right after the episode aired, Spade received a call from Eddie himself. And let's just say that he didn't hold back. Spade shared that he could barely defend himself in front of his icon because, deep down, he felt guilty for making the joke, too.
And then, because I did feel a little guilty about it. You know, he was a hero.
This wasn't just another celebrity he had roasted. This was his hero, a man he had looked up to his entire life. And that cut was a little too deep. David Spade first spoke publicly about the backlash from the joke in a 1997 interview with Entertainment Weekly. At the time, he recalled a conversation with Chris Rock, who pointed out how strange the situation was. Eddie Murphy was riding high with his most successful movie in years, and still deeply affected by a single joke. Spade said his response back then was dismissive, suggesting that Eddie should simply move on and not let it get under his skin. But years later, Spade has admitted his perspective had completely changed. In his 2015 memoir, Almost Interesting, he reflected on the lasting damage a joke like that can cause. He acknowledged that a single public jab can quietly shift how audiences see someone, especially when that person is already under scrutiny. While he once avoided thinking about the fallout of harsh jokes, Spade confessed that he now understands there are real consequences, and that he himself wouldn't handle that kind of ridicule any better if the roles were reversed. Looking back, Spade said he finally understood Eddie Murphy's reaction. Chapter 2: Eddie Murphy Speaks Out. But let's take a look at the other side of the picture too. Eddie Murphy has also gone on the record to explain why he was so riled up about the joke. And to be honest, his reasons are completely fair. The comedian didn't actually have a problem with Spade. He had a problem with SNL itself. Now, Murphy had been one of the show's biggest stars back in the 80s. In fact, his 4-year stint on the show saved its fate and injected a brand new life into it. So when the producers still chose to air that joke, it felt personal to Murphy. This was a place he had spent some of the best years of his career with, and for his alma mater to be using him as a punchline just didn't feel nice. Spade was the one who delivered the blow, but the joke passed through writers and producers. People sat in a room and approved it before it went live, and that realization led Murphy to completely distance himself from SNL because he felt like he just wasn't getting the respect he deserved. For years, the feud was dismissed as nothing more than a bruised ego and a bad joke taken too seriously. But when Eddie finally broke his silence, it became clear that he perceived the moment as way more than just what people saw. When Eddie Murphy reflected on the incident in a candid interview with the New York Times, he was brutally honest. He called the joke a cheap shot. And more importantly, he admitted something that many fans hadn't fully considered before. He felt it was racist. Eddie didn't accuse David Spade personally of racism. Instead, he pointed to something bigger. When Eddie came up in the early 80s, there was no such thing as a thriving black Hollywood ecosystem. No rap moguls, no billion-dollar hip-hop industry, no safety net. He carried the weight of representation on his shoulders. So when his career was mocked publicly, at a time when black entertainers were scrutinized more harshly and discarded more quickly, it felt loaded. Eddie said the joke wasn't just about a movie flopping, it was about legitimacy, about whether he still belonged. And in Eddie's mind, no one else from SNL had ever been treated that way. Chapter 3. The Fallout. For decades, Eddie avoided anything and everything to do with SNL. He missed the show's 25th anniversary and multiple reunion specials. But things changed in 2018 when SNL creator Lorne Michaels admitted to making a huge mistake with the distasteful joke. In a rare moment of reflection, Michaels admitted that he should have never let the joke air, and that making fun of one of their own crossed a line. But maybe that admission finally made Eddie feel like he was being heard. Because in 2015, he cautiously decided to return to SNL for its 40th anniversary special, and that was big. But while fans were hoping for him to deliver laughs, he was just there, smiling, waving, and not talking. Little did the audience know, though, that SNL had made a major mistake again, and Eddie was once again let down by the place he once trusted. Murphy had originally been written into a sketch for the anniversary special, one that would have featured him impersonating Bill Cosby. At the time, Cosby was facing multiple allegations of assault, and the idea was meant to be edgy, provocative, and headline-grabbing. But Murphy shut it down at the last second, when he later explained why, and claimed that there was nothing funny about the sketch, and that it would hurt the women accusing him of this misbehavior. Murphy confessed that he didn't want to turn his long-awaited return to SNL into something that fed off someone else's pain. In his words, he didn't want to kick somebody while they were down, just like SNL had done to him years ago. But something always kept pulling him back to the show. So Eddie finally decided to make his big comeback and return to host SNL in December 2019. 35 years had passed since Eddie last hosted the show. The final time was a Christmas episode in 1984, back when he was still a cast member, still in his early 20s, and still carrying the weight of holding the entire show together on his shoulders. This time, he walked into Studio 8H as something very different, a legend. By the time Eddie agreed to host in 2019, he had already tested the waters once before with his restrained, joke-free appearance at the SNL 45th anniversary special. That moment was cautious, measured, almost guarded. 2019 was the opposite. From the opening monologue alone, it was clear this night wasn't about pretending the past never happened. Eddie directly addressed the elephant in the room, his long absence, and did so on his own terms, with humor that felt confident rather than defensive. He was controlling the narrative. He brought back iconic characters like Gumby and Buckwheat, but instead of replaying them beat for beat, the sketches were updated with self-awareness and context. The comedy acknowledged time, change, and evolution, both Eddie's and the world's. After the episode aired, Eddie Murphy won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Guest Actor in a Comedy Series. It was industry-wide acknowledgement that Eddie Murphy's absence hadn't diminished his greatness. For a man who once felt pushed out of the institution he helped build, that recognition closed a loop that had been left open for decades. So by the time the show's 50th anniversary rolled around in February 2025, fans were hopeful all over again. But he took everyone by surprise once again. Chapter 4: The Closure. David Spade and Eddie Murphy actually crossed paths backstage at the SNL 50th Anniversary Special, a gathering that brought together every major era of the show under one roof. Eddie decided to let the past be in the past and be part of this momentous occasion, and this made room for the two comedians to bury the hatchet too. According to Spade, the moment was completely unscripted. As Spade was walking into the studio, Eddie noticed him, and instead of ignoring him or walking past, Eddie stopped him. Not just that, he physically blocked him from walking by and pulled him into a hug. There was no big confrontation or lecture or even a conversation revisiting the joke. The senior comedian decided to let it all go, and just like that, everything was okay between the two of them. Spade recalls Eddie being super cool, casual, and warm, the opposite of the tension that the younger comedian had carried with himself for 25 years. Eddie took this a step further to publicly admit that there was only love between him and Spade, which meant that their Cold War was officially over. To understand why that joke hit Eddie the way it did, you have to understand who Eddie Murphy was to Saturday Night Live and what the show meant to him. When Eddie joined SNL in 1980, the show was on the brink of cancellation. Ratings were falling, cast members were leaving, critics were circling. Even Lorne Michaels had stepped away after years of burnout, which left the show completely directionless. People started referring to it as Saturday Night Dead because no one thought that it would ever recover. Then Eddie Murphy showed up. Chapter 5: The Revival of SNL. When Eddie Murphy joined the cast in 1980, he wasn't treated like the savior he would later become. At first, he was barely visible. He didn't appear in the premiere episode. In the second, he was little more than background noise. But once he was given a microphone, everything changed. Murphy's breakout came during Weekend Update, as ironic as it is, where he played a fictional student-athlete protesting racial hypocrisy with sharp wit and fearless confidence. The audience was in splits. For the first time in years, SNL felt alive again. Viewers tuned in for Eddie, and slowly, the show began orbiting around him. In just a few seasons, he became the breakout star, creating iconic characters, drawing in viewers, and quite literally saving the show from extinction. As ratings continued to sink, NBC made a drastic move. Most of the cast was cut loose at the end of the season, but Eddie Murphy stayed. With a new executive producer in place and fewer distractions, Murphy was given more screen time, and he took over completely. He was the beating heart of the show. His characters like Buckwheat, Gumby, Mr. Robinson, and Velvet Jones were instant classics, and his impersonations were practically iconic. At that point, Eddie wasn't just starring on SNL, he was SNL. SNL meant everything to him, and to realize that the producers didn't return the feelings, yeah, that hurt. As SNL stabilized, Eddie Murphy exploded beyond it. While still appearing weekly on live television, he was filming hit movies, releasing comedy albums that went gold, and becoming one of the most recognizable entertainers on the planet. Few performers before have outgrown their launchpad as quickly as Eddie did. The show he saved soon felt too small for him, too soon, and it's not hard to see why. By his final season in 1984, Murphy was restless and ready to move on. Almost immediately, he became one of America's biggest movie stars. His first major breakout, 28 Hours, proved that he could take over the screen in scripted formats too. And then came Beverly Hills Cop, a cultural phenomenon that introduced the world to Eddie Murphy's genius. Honestly, the kind of success Murphy has experienced is unheard of among SNL alumni. In fact, everyone after him, including Spade, sees him as the benchmark. Not only was Eddie dominating the big screen, but he was also reviving stand-up culture like no other. His comedy specials have gone down in pop culture history, and are quoted to this day because of how timeless his humor is. From class commentary to racial politics, there wasn't a topic that Murphy was too afraid to tackle. The 1990s marked a turning point. Eddie began experimenting more with genre, tone, and audience. Films like Boomerang showed a more polished, romantic side of his screen persona, while projects like The Distinguished Gentleman leaned heavily into political satire. Not every risk paid off. Hollywood's relationship with Eddie began to shift. Critics became harsher. Expectations became unrealistic. Any movie that wasn't a massive hit was framed as a failure, even if it performed reasonably well. This era also exposed a double standard. Eddie Murphy was held to a level of scrutiny that very few actors faced. A single underperforming film could trigger headlines questioning his relevance, something that rarely happened to his peers. Still, Eddie wasn't one to back down. Chapter 6: Eddie Murphy, the Hollywood Icon. Long before Eddie Murphy ever felt sidelined by Hollywood institutions, he had already proven he wasn't afraid to call them out. Back in 1988, during the Academy Awards, Eddie took one of the boldest risks of his career while standing on the biggest stage in the industry. As he prepared to present Best Picture, he used his time at the microphone to address the Academy's long history of overlooking black performers. Later reflecting on the moment while promoting his Netflix documentary, Being Eddie, Murphy recalled telling Robin Williams backstage exactly what he planned to say. Williams questioned whether it was worth it. Eddie didn't hesitate. He wasn't trying to provoke outrage. He wanted to be funny, sharp, and honest, all at once. Murphy joked that he almost declined the invitation to present altogether because black actors had rarely been recognized by the Oscars. He openly acknowledged that speaking out might cost him future awards, but he said it anyway. At that point, only a handful of black actors had ever won Oscars, spaced decades apart, and Murphy made it clear he found that unacceptable. What surprised him most wasn't backlash. It was silence. The moment barely made waves, and yet history quietly moved forward. Just 2 years later, Denzel Washington won for Glory. Murphy himself would come close years later with Dreamgirls, but the Oscar never came. Still, he never softened his stance. In 1996, Eddie shocked everyone by taking a creative gamble that redefined his career yet again. The Nutty Professor was a technical masterclass. Eddie played multiple characters, transforming himself physically and vocally in ways that blurred the line between comedy and performance art. And of course, in doing so, he opened himself up to a brand new audience. The film was a massive success. Audiences embraced this new version of Eddie Murphy, not just as a charismatic lead, but as a chameleon capable of disappearing into roles. This phase continued with Dr. Dolittle and its sequel, cementing him as a box office powerhouse once again. Eddie had reinvented himself without chasing trends, and the critics were left shocked once again. Then came Shrek. As the voice of Donkey, Eddie introduced himself to an entirely new generation. The role showcased his timing, warmth, and improvisational brilliance, even without his face on screen. The Shrek franchise became one of the highest-grossing animated series of all time, and Eddie Murphy was a huge part of its heart. At this point, his career had spanned stand-up, live television, blockbuster films, family comedies, and animation. Very few entertainers have that kind of range. And Eddie faced renewed criticism. Instead of fighting for relevance, he did something unexpected. He stepped back. Eddie Murphy became more selective, prioritizing his personal life and long-term legacy over constant visibility. Unlike many stars who burn out trying to stay everywhere, Eddie chose distance. When Eddie eventually returned to the spotlight, it wasn't out of desperation. It was intentional. His performance in Dolomite Is My Name reminded critics and audiences alike of his depth as an actor. The role earned him widespread acclaim and award recognition, proving that Eddie Murphy wasn't just a nostalgic icon, he was still evolving, even decades later. By this point, Eddie's career had come full circle, from a teenage prodigy to a global superstar like no other. That's why the pain cut so deep years later. Not because of one joke, but because of what it symbolized. To Eddie, It felt like the show he helped save had forgotten who he was, what he gave, and how much of its survival was tied to his name. Respect mattered to him, especially from a place he once considered home. Yet, despite everything, Eddie never erased Saturday Night Live from his story. He never disowned it. He simply stepped away when it stopped feeling mutual. But the truth is, Eddie Murphy didn't need SNL to validate his legacy. His career had already done that. Eddie Murphy has been through the highest of highs and the lowest of lows since he first stepped on that stage on SNL. What do you think about his and David Spade's feud finally ending? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching.